Hey everyone, this is our Sunday Bible study for August 23rd, 2020. We are in the Foundations Adult Classroom book, and we are in Lesson 12, Paul Appeals to Caesar. And that's in Acts chapter 25, verses 1 through 12. We will at least cover those 12 verses together, and if time permits, we'll go a little bit further into the text as far as we can go in the time that we have together. I want to thank you for taking time out of your day to spend some time in the study of God's Word. In the book, and beginning in the introduction, the author kind of lays out where we've been and what's going on. He says, Felix served as governor or procurator of Judea from AD 52 to 60. Although he sent for Paul frequently and conversed with him, he did not release the apostle who was in custody for 2 years. And verse 27 of Acts 24, and we noticed this when we ended our class last Sunday, the Bible says, but after 2 years, Porcius Festus succeeded Felix, and Felix, wanting to do the Jews a favor, left Paul bound. And so Paul has been on house arrest for 2 years and continues to be so as Festus takes control. His successor, Porcius Festus, inherited the responsibility of coming to a decision about Paul. Whether Festus initially possessed an added understanding of Jewish customs or practices or not, he was diligent. Shortly after his arrival in the province, he went to Jerusalem, presumably to become better oriented to his responsibilities. When he met with the Jewish leaders, they informed him against Paul. Festus listened to their complaints, but he did not agree to their requests to transfer the apostle back to Jerusalem. Paul remained in Caesarea. Those who wished to accuse him would have to come there. As a citizen of Rome, Paul was entitled to fair treatment. Perhaps Festus sensed the Jews desired otherwise. Regardless, Paul was aware of his rights and did not hesitate to utilize them to his advantage. In our lesson text, he did this by appealing to Caesar. When Festus was about to give in to Jewish demands and send Paul to Jerusalem, he declared, I stand at Caesar's judgment seat, where I ought to be judged. According to Polehill, Paul seems to have made use of an ancient right of Roman citizens that goes back to at least the 5th century BC. Known as provocatio, it gave a citizen the right to appeal a magistrate's verdict to a jury of fellow citizens. Under the empire, the emperor himself became the court of appeal, replacing the former jury of peers. Though appeal was generally made only after a verdict had been reached, Paul's appeal before condemnation seems to have been in order. Festus really had no desire to establish Paul's innocence for fear of repercussions from the Jews. He was probably relieved by Paul's appeal. It took the whole troublesome matter out of his hands. More than anything else, the event served to facilitate Paul's desire to go to Rome, even if it did not occur as he had envisioned. And so we want to notice a few points as we go through these 12 verses. Number one, we'll begin by noticing Festus and the priest in verses 1 through 5. Festus and the priest, verses 1 through 5. We begin by seeing the request. In verse 1, now when Festus had come to the province, after 3 days he went up from Caesarea to Jerusalem. And so Festus has taken over, he has replaced Felix, and we see right here that he's only 3 days into his reign as the governor or proconsul, whichever term you want to use. And so he's in 3 days in, he decides, I'm going to go from Caesarea, which is where his place was stationed and where the palace and everything where he was located, that's where it was. But he ruled over the region, and Jerusalem was part of that region. So after 3 days, he decides, I'm going to go to Jerusalem and see what's going on there, get an idea of some of these individuals that I'm ruling over. Verse 2, then the high priest and the chief men of the Jews informed him against Paul, and they petitioned him. The little book on page 132 says that the term translated informed in the New King James means the Jews laid out their case, the ESV, or brought charges against the New American Standard. 2 years had passed since Paul was arrested in Jerusalem and taken to Caesarea. Nevertheless, the hatred the Jewish leaders had for him had not subsided. This is almost amazing to me. 2 years has passed. They haven't forgotten. They know where he's at. They continue to do everything that they can in order to end the life of Paul. And so, as the author said, in 2 years, their hatred had not subsided at all. And so they inform Festus, as we saw. They laid out their case. They brought charges against him. They want Festus to understand what's going on. The word petitioned here, it's in the imperfect tense, and we'll notice a quote about that here in a moment. But it denotes that this wasn't a one-time thing. They kind of pushed the issue. They kept petitioning, asking over and over. In verse 3, it says, they petitioned him, asking a favor against him, speaking of Paul, that he would summon him, Paul, to Jerusalem, while they lay in ambush along the road to kill him. On page 132, the author says, concerning this request, Bach wrote, the Jews presented this proposal to Festus as a favor to them, something a new ruler might be inclined to do. The imperfect tense in the request suggests an element of pressure. And so we have here Festus, he's being pressured by the Jews. We don't know from the way this is worded whether or not they told him that they were going to lay in ambush along the road to kill him. Obviously, I wouldn't put it past them to tell him that was the case, or if they just told him, we want you to summon him to Jerusalem so that we can try him here all along, though their plan was to kill him along the way. Regardless of which one it is, the Jews have a request, and they're doing everything they can to end the life of Paul. And that brings us to a second subpoint here, and that is the refusal. We see the request that was made. Now we see the refusal by Festus. In verse 4, but Festus answered that Paul should be kept at Caesarea, and that he himself was going there shortly. Paul says no, or Festus says, no, Paul's in Caesarea. He's going to stay there. But I'm going back that way very soon. Verse 5, therefore, he said, since Paul's staying in Caesarea and since I'm going back there, let those who have authority among you go down with me and accuse this man to see if there is any fault in him. What's Festus' decision? Paul staying put. Jews need to come. They need to state their case against him. Festus knows that this has been done before, but he wasn't the one ruling at that time, so he wants to hear the case for himself. On pages 133 into 134, the author says, regarding this statement, Schnabel observed, by insisting that the Jewish accusers come to Caesarea, Festus demonstrates his administrative competency and integrity, as well as the force of his authority as the governor of the province. The governor's integrity also shows in the formulation if there is anything wrong about the man. This first-class conditional allows for the possibility that the Jewish leaders may yet want to decide whether they are convinced that Paul has done something improper or wrong that demands official accusations in a trial. Festus implies that only accusations with proper reasons will be admitted. And so it sounds at first as if Festus coming to power is a good thing for Paul. Now, we're going to see, unfortunately, Festus isn't going to live up to these ideals that are on the front end. But at least at the beginning, it seems like Festus has an understanding that maybe Paul really hasn't done anything that's worthy of these trials, and kind of seeks for the Jewish leaders to maybe reconsider what they're doing. Of course, they're not going to do that. Their hatred for Paul won't allow them to do that. And that brings us to our second point, and that is Festus and the prisoner. Festus and the prisoner in verses 6 through 12. We want to begin by noticing the accusations in verses 6 and 7. And when he had remained among them more than 10 days, he went down to Caesarea. Who's it talking about? It's talking about Festus. Festus had gone to Jerusalem very early in his reign here. He stayed there for about 10 days, or the Bible says a little more than 10 days, getting a feel for Jerusalem, which was the largest place in the province that he was ruling. And it says, in the next day, sitting on the judgment seat. So he's returned to Caesarea. He's on what's called the judgment seat. This is the place where the governor, magistrate, proconsul, whoever, this is where they would sit, showing that they were in the position of authority here. Sitting on the judgment seat, he commanded Paul to be brought. Verse 7, and when he had come, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood about and laid many serious complaints against Paul, which they could not prove. Now, more than likely, these were the same complaints that we noticed that they stated to Felix, that Paul was one who had created dissension among the Jews, that he had profaned the temple, that he was one that was causing uproars and riots. These trumped up charges that they had made that they had no proof for. They were merely accusations. Felix had seen that, but because he didn't want to anger the Jews, he had kept Paul in prison all this time. And no doubt Festus surely can see that as well. The key phrase in verse 7 is, which they could not prove. If this is supposed to be a trial and they can't prove their accusations, well, then there's only one verdict that could be found, and that is that Paul is innocent. It would seem that this should be an open and shut case, that no proof, no conviction. Paul's free to go. So what seems to be the problem? Well, the problem is going to be Festus's desire to keep the Jews appeased. And that brings us to our second subpoint, and that is the answer. We see the answer in verse 8. While he, being Paul, answered for himself, neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I offended in anything at all. Now, the first two things that he says, not against the law of the Jews or against the temple, those really aren't things that concern Festus. Whether or not Paul's done something that deals with the Jewish religion, that Festus could care less. That's their deal. They can handle that. You know, that was the thing with Jesus. Why the Jews brought him to the Romans was because they could not sentence him to death. But the Romans could. So they convicted him and then had the Romans carry out the punishment. And so here we see those things, they don't concern Festus. But also Paul adds, nor against Caesar. He says, even I'm standing before you, Festus, to be judged according to Roman law. I haven't done anything against Roman law. I haven't done anything to offend Caesar. Paul was faultless. He was a man, but he had done nothing wrong concerning these things. Obviously, Paul wasn't faultless in the sense that he never sinned, but he was faultless in this matter that they had brought against him. They had accused him of being a creator of dissension among the Jews. He had not done that. Now, what they might have considered dissension was people leaving Judaism, becoming Christians because of the truth of what he taught, but that's not causing dissension. That's people making a decision. They refer to him as the ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes, which, of course, he denied the idea that what he was a part of was a sect. That's their way of referring to Christianity. Furthermore, Paul was not the ringleader. Now, he was a prominent member of the Lord's church, and obviously he did a lot for the cause of Christ. He's prominently featured in the book of Acts that we have recorded. We have letters that he wrote to various congregations that he helped to establish, and so no doubt a prominent individual, but not the ringleader. Jesus is the leader. Jesus is the head. The Bible clearly points that out. And so this wasn't accurate. And then they said that he tried to profane the temple. This goes back to when he was in the temple doing this purification ritual, that there were people who had saw them, some Jews from Asia, had seen him earlier with Gentiles when he was out in the city. They just made the assumption that he had brought those same Gentiles into the temple. They set everyone in an uproar, saying that he had defiled the temple by bringing Gentiles in it. That's what set this whole chain of events off, was some people making an assumption that was not based on facts. And Paul had never done that. He had never brought Gentiles into the temple. Paul had a great respect for the Jewish religion. He would never have done something so overtly against their laws. But yet that's what they're accusing him of. Paul had done nothing worthy of what was occurring. There's a lesson learned here. You can't please all the people all the time. I know you've probably heard the statement, you can please some of the people some of the time. You can please maybe all the people some of the time. You might be able to please some of the people all the time, but you can never please all the people all the time. So quit trying and just focus on pleasing God. That's what matters. If we're pleasing God, nothing else matters. It doesn't matter if people are angry or not with us. It doesn't matter if they approve or not. If what we're doing is pleasing to the God of heaven, then we're good to go. And that brings us to the appeasement in verse 9. But Festus, wanting to do the Jews a favor, answered Paul and said, "Are you willing to go up to Jerusalem and there be judged before me concerning these things?" So Festus, once again, just like Felix, he wants to please men. Instead of doing the right thing here, he knows that Paul is innocent, but he's trying to figure out a way that he can appease the Jews. And so he says, "Hey, Paul, are you willing to go back to Jerusalem and there be judged before me concerning these things?" Now, here's the catch. At this point, I think Festus it does know what the Jews have planned. Because why would it be necessary to go back to Jerusalem to repeat the same trial that is happening right now? There's no need. Festus is simply trying to help the Jews out and give them a way to take care of Paul, so this will be over with. On page 135, the author says, "Here we see a crack in the governor's character. Up to this point, he had given the impression that he sought justice. Given the lack of proof against the apostle, he could have dismissed the case altogether. Nevertheless, politics played a role in his actions. Describing this, Roper observed, the governor was between the proverbial rock and a hard place. On the one hand, he dared not find Paul guilty for fear of Rome. Paul was a Roman citizen and had certain rights. If it were reported to Rome that Festus had punished an innocent Roman citizen, he would be severely penalized." And so, on one hand, Festus has Rome, and he understands that Paul's innocent. There's no proof, and if he ends up punishing Paul, and Rome gets wind of it, and the fact that Paul was actually innocent, well, then it's going to be Festus's head on the chopping block. And so he has nowhere to go on that front. On the other hand, he dared not find Paul innocent for fear of the Jews. Here we have, though, if he finds Paul innocent, he's going to have an uproar with the Jewish people. Once again, that's a problem, because in Roman law, if there's a riot and uproar and that's not squashed quickly, then once again, Festus will be brought to the carpet on what happened, why it happened, and why he didn't do something to stop it. And so we see the situation that Festus finds himself. It's not a situation that you want to be in. But that doesn't change the fact that there was a right thing to do, and Festus is choosing not to do it. In less than 2 weeks, at his new post, his lofty ideals had been crushed. Like many politicians before and after him, he ended up concerned with what was politically expedient. And so we see the answer given by Paul to the accusations. We see Festus trying to appease the Jews and asking Paul to return to Jerusalem to be tried. And then we see the appeal in verses 10 through 12. So Paul said, "I stand at Caesar's judgment seat, where I ought to be judged. To the Jews I have done no wrong, as you very well know." He points it right at Festus and says, I'm standing at Caesar's judgment seat right now. You're sitting there in the judgment seat with the authority of Caesar to make a judgment. There's no need for me to go back to Jerusalem and us redo this all over again. You're in the judgment seat, so make a judgment. He says, to the Jews I've done no wrong. He said, I stand at Caesar's judgment seat. I'm a Roman citizen. This is where I should be judged, here in Caesarea, before you, not back in Jerusalem. He says, I've done no wrong to the Jews, and you know that. Verse 11, for if I am an offender, or have committed anything deserving of death, I do not object to dying. Paul says, if I have done something that is worthy of dying, then I don't object to dying. And I wonder if Paul is seeing what's going on, understanding why it is that Festus wants to send him back to Jerusalem, knowing that the Jews, they had tried this once before and the plot got foiled. It would only make sense that they would try it again. And so Paul says, hey, if I've done something worthy of death, Festus, then I don't object to dying. You're planning on sending me to my death. I don't object to dying if I've done something worthy of death. But Paul hadn't. He says, but if there is nothing in these things of which these men accuse me, no one can deliver me to them. He says, Festus, I haven't done anything. You can't deliver me to them. Why can't you deliver me to him? Because the next phrase that Paul says, I appeal to Caesar. He takes care of the situation by using the right that he had as a Roman citizen to appeal to stand before Caesar himself and for Caesar to make a judgment concerning these things. Paul's no dummy. He knows what the Jews are planning. And in fact, the word deliver here that is used, Paul was going, or that he was going to deliver him. The word deliver carries the idea of delivering as a gift. So Paul is telling Festus in what he's saying that he knows what's going on. He knows what the Jews are planning on doing. He knows what Festus is wanting to allow them to do. In verse 12, then Festus, when he had conferred with the council, answered, you have appealed to Caesar, you shall go. Paul makes another statement of his innocence and even states that they themselves know this. Those who are standing there in judgment know that he's innocent. Paul says if he's done something deserving of death, then that's fine. He's fine with dying for that. But he's not all for it when he hasn't done anything wrong. So what does he do? What does it mean that he appeals to Caesar? The word appeal there is a technical term for lodging an appeal. He's appealing to a higher court. And in this case, he's appealing to the highest court that there is. That is to Caesar himself. That brings us to the applications. And we'll notice these applications together. And if we have a few minutes left, we might go just a little bit further into the text, especially noting a man by King Agrippa. And so the application, we got two of those. Number one, Paul's conduct was above reproach. Although his enemies made several serious charges against him, there was no basis for their accusations. And Paul had lived his life in such a way that these accusations, they could not be proven. As we seek to reach others with the gospel, we should seek to live in an upright manner. It's important that as we're striving to teach others that they can't look at our life and say, well, you're saying I should do these things, but you're not doing them. And Paul lived his life in such a way that people couldn't make that charge against him. Peter told his audience to have conduct honorable among the Gentiles, that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may, by your good works which they observe, glorify God in the day of visitation. 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 12. You know, to anyone looking from the outside looking in, they would see that Paul was being falsely accused, and that Paul was actually the one in the right in this situation. The man who was a Christian was in the right. The Jews were the ones that were in the wrong for making these false accusations. That brings us to the second point that we want to notice. The author says the government exists as a divinely appointed institution. As such, it is authorized by God to punish the guilty and praise those who do good. 1 Peter 2:14. Also, we would add Romans 12 to the passages that you can look at concerning the government being appointed by God. Paul did not object to the government's position. If he had violated the laws of the land, he deserved to be punished. If he was innocent, though, he deserved justice. Paul didn't object to the government, and he didn't object to him standing before the government and being judged on these things. And if he was guilty, he didn't object to being punished for that. He clearly states that. What he did object to, though, was the fact that he was innocent and he was not receiving justice because of that. He did not hesitate to take advantage of the privileges his citizenship offered. Like him, we must recognize the government's place. You know, that's a good lesson, especially during the times of the pandemic right now. When the government makes a decision, makes a mandate, we have a responsibility as Christians. If it does not violate God's law, we have a responsibility to follow those mandates. It doesn't matter if we agree with them or think they're right. It doesn't make a difference. We have a responsibility as Christians to obey the laws that are set by the government. That's all the time we have for this morning. King Agrippa becomes the central focus of the rest of chapter 25 and chapter 26. Remember, King Agrippa is the one who said, "Almost you persuade me," speaking to Paul, "almost you persuade me to be a Christian." Friends, let's not be almost persuaded. Let's be fully persuaded and live our life for God. Thanks again for listening. Hope the study's been beneficial to you. We'll pick up again next Sunday, and we'll notice the final lesson for this quarter concerning Paul in the book of Acts. We're going to notice a shipwreck that takes place when the Apostle Paul is journeying to Rome. Hope you have a great day.